Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how to heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Monk Yoon Roh. Monk Yoon Roh is an author. He's written several books. His most recent is Mad Monk Manifesto. He's also written a book, The Truth About Chronic Pain, and Tai Chi, The Perfect Exercise. You can find out more about Monk Yoon Roh at YUNROW.com. Welcome, Monk Yoon Roh.
Thank you. So good to be here.
Now, we're going to be talking today about a subject that you and I have both written books about. You wrote a book, The Truth About Chronic Pain. I wrote a book called The Difference Between Pain and Suffering, which is my 8th book and my most recent 6th Amazon #1 bestseller. So, Monk Yoon Roh, what is your approach for helping people get out of pain naturally?
I think there's a large misunderstanding that pain is a primarily physical event, when the fact is that it is multifactorial. There are so many different things that contribute to it. I remember that when I was working on The Truth About Chronic Pain, I had an interview with a bench researcher whose job it was to figure out, how the brain registered pain. And he was a seminal contributor to that field, very famous guy. And one of the things he told me that sticks with me all these years later, that book was some years ago, was no brain, no pain. So when we have a sore leg or a sore hip or a sore elbow, the pain actually is not in the leg or hip or elbow, but it is in our brain. And as a result of being in our brain, it means that it is in that strange land between our ears, which is so colored by our experience, by societal influences, by our psychological state at the moment, and by numerous other factors, many of which we have yet to identify. So we could start by saying that one of the best things in terms of getting out of pain is to have your experience of pain validated by someone else. So validated means, primarily, of course, by a healthcare person, but also by those around you, just saying, Catherine, I recognize your pain. I see that you're in pain. I acknowledge you as a person and your suffering. And it is quite startling, and there have been quite a few studies on this, it's quite startling that when people take pain assessment tests or quizzes, where they have to mark a number to go with their pain from 1 to 10, which, by the way, is a scale that I contributed to developing years ago when I worked in the pharmaceutical business. When they take that test, before and after having been validated in the way I described, their perception of their pain goes down. Just that thing. So in many cases, just, for example, a physician walking into the room and saying, okay, I'm here to help you. I recognize that you are in pain. I'm going to see what I can do to help you. Right away, people could go from a 9 to a 5, for example, just from that, which is a fascinating thing. So, when we approach our pain, we have to look at it as a global experience. By that, I don't mean planet Earth, although there is that aspect to it too, but I mean global in terms of our own experience.
Now, this approach that you're describing is so parallel and in alignment with what I wrote about in my book, The Difference Between Pain and Suffering. And it's worth sort of relating the story of how I came to write that book. So I'm intuitive, and one day I was driving down the road and my guidance said, write a little article about the difference between pain and suffering. So when I got to my computer 30 minutes later, I wrote this quick little article explaining the difference between pain and suffering. Pain's the physical experience, suffering's your emotional experience. So I wrote this article, and then I started noticing the readership on my blog, CatherineCarrigan.com, and I kid you not, someone reads that article literally every day of my life. Well, when I noticed the attention to this, I realized, a lot of people are trying to figure this out. What's going on in my body? What's going on in my emotions? How is my psychological state affecting my overall well-being? So I wrote a book, and when I do a medical intuitive reading, I read what's going on physically, energetically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And as you know, Monk Yunro, those are all one. And we can have one experience, but when you're having dis-ease or illness or pain and suffering, it's literally happening on all the levels. What do you say?
So one thing I think about when we talk about this subject is a story that happened to me some years ago, which is, I want to say probably 20 years ago, when I went for a visit to my primary Chinese master. And he asked me how I was doing, and I said, I don't know. I think I'm depressed. And he said, depressed? You mean sad? And I said, maybe you could say that, but there is kind of sort of a difference between depression and sadness, at least in medical terms. One is kind of a stronger statement than the other, and means that I'm kind of sad all the time, and that I'm not finding joy in life, and then I'm feeling pain here and there, and so on. And he looked at me and he said, are you taking any pills for this? And I said, no, but I've thought about it. I haven't, but I've thought about it. And he said, oh, well, you don't need pills. You just need to fix the problem. And I said, okay. And what is the problem? Because from where I'm sitting, the problem is I'm depressed. And he said, oh, no. The problem is a failure of your philosophy. And I didn't really connect with that statement. I said, what do you mean a failure of my philosophy? He said, if you're sad or depressed, it means that you don't understand clearly who you are, and what is your place in the world. And if you understand those things, then you don't have this anymore. And it was such a simple statement from someone I've come to discover as an extraordinarily wise person. But I took it home and I mulled over it, and I began to attack the problem from that point of view, and I had success, and I continue to every day.
Now, how does understanding who we are and what we are help us to get out of pain naturally?
So there's this thing called cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is just a technical term. It's not a Taoist term, by the way. It's not a monk term. It's a scientific term. And it means the distance between what your life is and what you would like your life to be. What you imagine your life should be, what you think you want, who you think you want to be, as opposed to what you have and who you are. And that difference is a kind of a pain zone. That difference is a space in which we swim in a sea of discomfort, of pain. And the narrower we make that space, the more clearly we see ourselves accurately and see who we think we want to be, or what we think we want, or who we think we want, where we think we want to be. The more clearly we see those goals in contrast to where and who and how we are at the moment, the narrower is that gap and the smaller that sea of discomfort. So working on more clearly understanding really how much of your yearning, how much of your discomfort is not actually coming from inside you, but rather is coming from outside, being foisted upon you by forces you cannot control. the better off we are. So what do I mean by foisted upon you by forces you can't control? Well, we happen to be living in a time when globally, and this time I do mean, planet Earth-wise, globally, tyranny and oppression are on the rise. Are they as bad as they were in Neolithic times when people walked around and hit each other over the head with a dinosaur bone and took their meal and took their girlfriend? No. But do I mean worse than they were, 20 years ago or 30 years ago or maybe 50 years ago? Yes. And so this means that if we swim in a sea of media messages about the collapse of the ecosystem and the sixth great extinction, these are all things I write about in my new book, Mad Monk Manifesto. If we think about our politics and what's going on in the White House or in Washington or in our community, or we can't drink the water that's no good in our pipes, if we listen to the radio or the television or internet news, or we have, God forbid, a news feed on our phone that's constantly telling us what's going on, we affect our nervous system in a way that sets us up to be more aware of and responsive to noxious stimuli. So, for example, if we stub our toe when we are in an otherwise delightfully happy mood, let's make it really happy. Let's say we just had sex and now we stub our toe. But even if it's not that happy, let's say that we're just listening to music and straightening up the house, or we're doing some work on the computer, and or in my case, since I'm a writer, I'm happily writing away and I'm enjoying what I'm creating. And I turn around and I get up off my desk and I stub my toe. If I'm in a happy mood and my set point of discomfort is low, then I'm more likely to say, ouch, that hurt, and then move on to the kitchen to get a cup of coffee. But if I'm in misery, and if I'm sitting there deluged by media messages, oh my God, we're killing every living thing on the earth, what are we going to do? My children or my grandchildren are going to be in a Mad Max Holocaust kind of environment, oh my God. And then I get up and stub my toe. It's going to hurt much worse. So this kind of very simple and mechanical prescription simply says, be mindful of your state of mind, be cautious with the inputs that you receive from outside that affect your mood, and do wise, smart, aware, and self-disciplined things like turning stuff off, like using music to change your set point. I think that's a really good one. Having music on instead of the news. Read a book in the hot bath instead of binge watching violent television shows. These are all things that affect your mental state and affect your appreciation of pain. We can get further into more specific physical things to do about pain, but this is a great place to start.
Now, Monk Yun Ro, you are a Taoist monk. What is the difference between Taoism and Buddhism for our audience?
That's a great question. Many people wonder this. They are both old religions or philosophies. In the case of both Taoism and Buddhism, some practitioners and adherents view their practice as a religion and others as a philosophy. Taoism significantly predates Buddhism. Buddhism is plenty old, but Taoism is even older. There was a period of time that historians call the Axial Age, which is a time when there was a flowering of great and wonderful thinking around the world, not just in the East, but in the West too. And during that time, we had the great Greek philosophers, and we had the historical Buddha, and we also had in China a gentleman who's now known by the name of the old boy or the old master. Some people even say the old child to describe his sort of innocent wisdom. So that was the time at which all of these religions sort of cohered into what they are today. But in Taoism, there is quite a bit before that of belief in nature, in the value of studying and appreciating nature, and in following the guidance that what comes from understanding how nature works. And that, of course, goes back to animism and shamanism and goes back thousands of years into what is proto-China. So succinctly put, in Taoism, we don't have a Buddha, although there are branches of Taoism that try to fold Buddhism under their umbrella. And we are very keen on this life, not worrying too much about things like reincarnation or supernatural beings. Our position on what happens after we die and all that is very agnostic. We don't say that there is no heaven or hell. We don't say that there is no reincarnation. We just say we have no idea. And let's pay attention to what's going on in this life and worry about that when it happens. We'll find out.
So, Monk Yunro, what is the Taoist approach to pain then?
So, one difference that actually sticks to your previous question just a little bit is that in Buddhism, there is a feeling about pain being inevitable, but suffering being optional, which, as I understand, is a subject of one of your books. In Taoism, we have a large and rich and varied toolbox, which we use on a daily basis, and maybe you could even say on an hourly basis, to adjust our state of being in very specific and concrete ways. And many of these tools in the toolbox are physical practices, which is distinct from Buddhism. Buddhism has some. We have a real rich toolbox. So these include things that might be familiar to some of your listeners. For example, Qigong, which is a word that just means energy exercise or energy work. It's becoming more and more popular these days in the United States. It's been popular in China for thousands of years.
And also, I myself have taught Qigong for probably about 20 years now. So,
fabulous.
Yeah, every
That's
week.
Great.
Yeah, and when the weather's great, we practice outside in the garden, which is even more wonderful. So there's Qigong and
there's Tai Chi, which is sort of the emperor of the Chinese martial arts, or the crown jewel, but also the crown jewel of all Qigong as well. Some people who have a keen interest in these kinds of things, meaning in Asian practices and esoteric work, in mindful, moving, meditative practices, find that Tai Chi is is the thing. It's all that. But for folks who are less interested in all that, Qigong is nice because you can have much simpler, shorter, smaller sets of movements which are directed very specifically at certain organ systems in the Chinese medicine sense of that term. So those are very, very useful tools, and there are many of them. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of forms of Qigong, because in China, long before there was an infrastructure connecting the country, all these little villages around the country, every family had their own family Qigong. This is less true of Tai Chi. There are some different styles of Tai Chi, but they all come from one ancestral martial art. Anyway, these are really great practices for mitigating pain. And I have many, many students around the world, and all of them at one time or another use the practice to ameliorate some discomfort, ranging from things like Parkinson's and hypertension and insomnia and MS and other grievous illnesses to things that are more pedestrian, like a sore shoulder.
Now, I know, Monk Yunro, that you have been the host of the national public television show Longevity Tai Chi, and you're also the author of 15 books. So for our audience, what's the difference between Qigong and Tai Chi?
So simply put, Tai Chi is a battlefield martial art. It began in the form that we know it in the early 1600s in the north of central China. It drew on it's a tripod, you could say. It sits on three legs. One of those legs is Taoist philosophy, that thing which I write about and study and practice. Another is traditional Chinese medicine. That means the herbal and energetic medicine that we know in China. And the third leg was the sort of battlefield martial practices of the day. So Tai Chi was originally done with weapons that included exotic things like 7-foot-long halberds and 12-foot-long lances with spear points on them and double iron bars to break swords and all manner of swords, two-handed, one-handed, and so on. And now, in its evolution through history and across the planet, Tai Chi has become progressively more of an art for your health and for meditation and for the joy of physical movement, strength, fitness, and flexibility. Qigong does not have this martial component. So if you really know what you're doing with Tai Chi, and even if you have no interest in the martial arts, you want to have a teacher who understands those applications just so that you can make sure you are doing the movements correctly. In other words, if you don't know what you're doing, it's sort of tennis without the net. In the case of Qigong, you don't have to worry about the martial applications because there are not any.
Yeah, well said. No, we're talking about the Taoist approach to pain, and part of this tools chest, as you will, are Qigong and Tai Chi and the regular practice of those. What are the other aspects of the Taoist approach to pain?
So another key one is meditation. And I think that's probably the most important third leg. So just to recap, we covered a little bit, we touched on the idea of resetting your concept of who and what you are in your place in the world. And that includes, making sure you have a nurturing community around you, making sure that you have the material things that you need, not necessarily those you want, but those you need, having your needs, your physical needs met. Also, of course, when we talk about relationships, there's intimacy and touch, which are very important for ameliorating pain. Then we talked a little bit about the physical practices like Tai Chi and Qigong. So now we're adding this third dimension, which is not the last one, but it is the third one. And that is what you do with your mind, other than think about your place in the world. So this is a very difficult time for people with a meditative bent. And the fact that we are so besieged by weapons of mass distraction, which is a subject I give quite a bit of room in Mad Monk Manifesto, the latest book we're talking about. That being under siege that way has a high psychophysical price. And that price is that our nervous system is constantly on edge. We are constantly being asked to filter more and more information. And if we can get around that, we can settle the brain down and reduce my aforementioned set point of where we are when we begin to experience pain. So by being mindful, by the way, I have to take exception to all this talk about mindfulness. It's such a buzzword these days. And it's okay to talk about mindfulness. It is necessary, but it is not sufficient. So it's okay to be mindful, but you could be a mindful mass murderer. Mindfulness is not enough by itself, right? Mindfulness is not a goal. Mindfulness is a tool in the box. It's fine, but what are you going to do with the tool? If I have a hammer and I use it to build a house, yay. If I use the hammer to crack somebody's skull, no, not so good, right? So just having the tool by itself is insufficient. We have to know what to do with the mindfulness. So in Taoism, we have what we call our three treasures. They are compassion, frugality, and humility. And if we employ mindfulness in service to those ideas, then it will be a necessary consequence of that kind of life, an inevitable, I should say, consequence, that we will be less uncomfortable all the time. We will be triggering the release of hormones and neurotransmitters that contribute to our states of mind. And we will be working with a tool toward an end, which is to become a more frugal, a more humble, and a more compassionate person. The minute you start spending time worrying about other people, by worrying, I mean actively doing something to help, the less pain you will feel.
Very interesting. Now, you talked about the three treasures being compassion, frugality, and humility. So how can being more compassionate, more frugal, and more humble help us alleviate pain?
So let's say that we are engaged in the building of a radio, and we have on our tabletop some capacitors and resistors and wires and a chassis, and we're holding a soldering iron, and we're building a little radio so we can hear the news or listen to music. As we pay attention to this building of the radio with this hot iron in our hand, we are doing a good job of putting all these little pieces together, not putting things in the wrong place, and we are concentrating greatly. And we are not so aware, for example, of the raging storm outside and the large raindrops hitting our tin roof or our windows. However, if while we're holding this very hot instrument, we start to be distracted and we look around, if we go, wow, that is a beautiful storm. That's amazing. All of a sudden, our attention is not so occupied by the hot iron in our hand or the construction of the radio, but rather we see the project we are doing in a more appropriate context. I'm not saying that we get so distracted that we solder the wrong thing or burn our fingertips, but rather that we just have this feeling of, wow, what a marvelous experience this is to be building a radio in the midst of this beautiful storm, and look at those trees bending outside and the whistling of the wind, and how small am I and how large is the nature outside my window. And in the same way that we could approach seeing our project in a more healthy context, not quite so maniacally focused that we don't hear the screams of our neighbor being robbed or beaten, or don't notice the beauty of the storm. In the same way, when we are in discomfort and pain, it is our natural tendency to increasingly focus on our direct experience of pain and discomfort. And the more distraction and the more mindful we are, not in a numb way and not in a dumb way, but in a wider scope way, the less of a role that pain plays in the overall landscape of our life. It may still be there, but it's not the emperor.
I love that. Now, we're still talking about the Taoist approach to pain. How important do you think diet is to alleviating pain naturally?
Oh, one of my favorite questions. So, first of all, let's talk about the health side of diet and our choices that we can make, and then let's talk about the spiritual side, because as you have early pointed out in our chat together today, these things interdigitate very intimately. So we'll start with the health side. There are all kinds of ingredients in our packaged foods, and particularly in animal products, which we didn't ask for, but we are being given anyway. So if I might digress for just a moment, we swim in a sea. I use this metaphor differently now than I did before. We swim in a sea of influences of which we are not aware. So there are some nice Eastern parables about the fish who doesn't recognize the water in which he swims, even though he swims in it. We have been taught all kinds of things about what our body needs nutritionally to be helpful, to be healthy, which are completely and totally bogus. And they are lessons that have been of interest to people who wish to sell us things. So, for example, the 3 food groups, the food pyramids, the incompleteness of animal proteins, the need for dairy products in our life, and on and on. All of these things are nonsense. All of these things are manufactured by industries who stand to gain from us swallowing the tail, hook, line, and sinker. These are not people who have our best interests in mind, including the government people who make those things public, because they are often beholden to industry forces by lobbyists and bribes and everything else. This is a system of long-standing in our country, and most people just are blithely unaware of it. So let's start with dairy, since I mentioned dairy. The idea of putting your lips to a cow's udder is a strange idea. The idea of letting that secretion fester until it is rotten and then packaging it and selling it for a great deal of money in the grocery store on a high-end deli counter is bizarre. No other animal drinks the secretion of a different species that is intended and correctly reserved for its own young. We have no need of dairy products, and in fact, they create inflammation and trouble in our body, phlegm, congestion, and joint pain. So there is no need for any of that. We're taught that there is because there are people who want to sell us dairy products and wear a t-shirt that says "Got Milk." So let's start by eliminating those. Second, but not less noxious, is sugar. When my European and Asian friends come and visit me in the United States, they're often stunned by the fact that there is sugar in hot dogs, sugar in bread, sugar in pretty much everything we eat. And I'm not even going to talk and rant about soft drinks and all that. So who has created and who benefits from a national addiction to sugar, which creates obesity and pain in many, many different ways? The answer is the people who sell sugar. So the sugar industry, big sugar, if you will, has put its lobbyists and its tentacles into so many things that we have all gotten a palate that expects things to be sweet, even when they should be tart or completely, absolutely absent any sweetness. There are so many other tastes on the register of our palate. So elimination of sugar and elimination of dairy, those are the 2 first steps to a healthy and pain-free body. Just stop them completely. No dessert, no soft drinks, no adding honey and sugar to your tea and coffee. No, no, no. Don't need it. Don't do it. Right? Both those things. No milk, no cheese, none of that. If you really, really, really crave the taste of dairy, there are wonderful vegan alternatives, cheeses made from tree nuts. I eat them sometimes. They're delicious. The third thing, of course, is meat. So whether we're talking about beef or we're talking about chicken or we're talking about fish or turkey, pork, all these things are created for us and made available at reasonable prices by an industry that uses all kinds of techniques to make their profits greater. So this means animals grow faster, they're confined, they don't move, and we pump them full of everything from the pesticides that we spray on the foods they eat to hormones and antibiotics and more. I'm not even going to discuss genetic engineering. That's a whole other show. So these things go from our food into our body because we are eating them. Don't do that. We don't need those things. A plant-based diet avoids 90% of those problems. We still have to worry about pesticides and some things which we can deal with to some extent by going organic with our produce. So these are the key health things. Now there's the psychological and spiritual aspects of how we eat. If we can eat a diet which ameliorates suffering, which does not cause unnecessary suffering, why would we not do so? If we can be even healthier and have the magnificent register available to us of the vegan diet, which includes thousands of edible plants, grains, fruits, vegetables, all kinds of things. People say, what are you going to eat? And they're thinking of the 4 or 5 things that people normally eat in the meat case at the grocery store. Those are a sliver on a tree compared to all the things that are available to eat. So the vegan diet is rich and varied, delicious, and it's healthy. It reduces inflammation in the body. It gives you more energy. This whole business of incomplete proteins, and you have to eat an animal protein to get a complete protein. This is as much nonsense as got milk. There is no scientific basis to it. We all bandy it about. We say, I tried that, but I need complete protein. Horse pucky. We don't need any of that. We don't need it. So by contributing to a world in which we are causing less suffering, we suffer less ourselves. There are energetic and psychological reasons for this, but it's a real phenomenon.
Good thinking. Now, going back to meditation, how important is meditation for helping people get out of pain?
So meditation is the other really big tool that we've been dancing around this toolbox a little bit. So there are many different kinds of meditation. And in fact, meditation really just means exercise for the mind. So when people say, well, I hate exercise, I sometimes say, really, do you hate ping pong? And somebody might say, no, I love ping pong. I go, play ping pong, but play it energetically. Play it every day. Play it with a partner that makes you run around and hop and reach and move. And people say, well, I don't like ping pong. I say, okay, do you like to take a walk in the woods? Well, I love to take a walk in the woods, but that's not exercise. Of course it is. Pick up the pace a little bit, make it a longer walk, and you bet it's exercise. Pick some terrain that is not flat, you got exercise. So the point is there are many, many different kinds of physical exercise. You can swim, you can run, you can do myriad other things, play sports. And so it is too with meditation. There are all these different kinds of exercises that we can choose according to our tastes and proclivities. And it doesn't really matter whether you do mindfulness meditation, whether you do Zen meditation, whether you do Taoist meditation, whether you do some kind of other popularized secular meditation that just has you sit quietly and pay attention to a candle flame or your breath. The kind of meditation is less important than that you do it. Just like the kind of exercise is less important than that you get off your duff and go do those things.
Now, how does a sedentary lifestyle contribute to pain, and what is the Taoist approach? What do Taoists say about people who just sit all the time?
Well, so this actually is one difference between Buddhist and Taoist meditation. Some Buddhist meditation has you sitting quietly in a legs folded stance, which often leads people to have trouble with their knees and their hips and their lower back and leads to surgeries and so on. I have so many friends who sit Zen, sitting Zazen, and then end up with back surgeries and so on. Whether that's true in the original practice in Japan is another story, because in the original monasteries in which sitting meditation was practiced, it was probably offset by quite a lot of manual labor and cleaning the place up and sweeping and cooking and walking and all that. Sitting is the new smoking. Sitting is the new smoking. Our bodies are meant to move. We are built to move. We are not computers. We are not meant to sit on or at the desk. We are meant to get up and move. So if you sit for long periods of time, you create myriad problems that will plague you as you age and eventually kill you. And these range from joint diseases and autoimmune problems to cardiovascular disease. So the most important thing you can do, if you are unfortunate enough to have a desk job where you're required to sit for long periods, then you must make frequent breaks. You must stand up, you must walk around, you must stretch, you must set a little timer on your computer screen that every 20 minutes, not every 2 hours, every 20 minutes you get up, you stretch, maybe you do a set of Qigong, maybe you take a little walk around the office, then you come back and sit down and do it again. If that's not enough, that's step one. Step two is you have to offset the time that you've spent sitting by vigorous cardiovascular exercise. That means getting your heart rate up, whatever, to an age-appropriate 80% of maximum level. And you need to do that for an hour every day, not every week, every day. If you don't do this, you are asking your body to live a life for which it has not evolved, it is not adapted, it was not intended, and it will die.
Now, Monk Yuen Ro, we've been talking about the Taoist approach to pain. If you could sort of summarize your prescription, if somebody in our audience is listening and they've been experiencing simple things like arthritis to chronic pain, how would you summarize your prescription for this person? Beginning with
job one, go do Tai Chi. Find a Tai Chi class in your area. And you probably will find more than one available because it's become quite popular now, unless you live in a rural area. And interview the schools. That means go to them, sit there and see if you like the teacher, because that's very important. You have to like, you don't have to want to be that person, but you have to like what it is they have, whether it's their sense of humor or their physicality or their equanimity and their mood or whatever. It has to be something about it you like. You have to speak to the other students and ask them, what are the results you've had here? What's your experience been here? Do you enjoy coming? And so on. Of course, you also have to pick a class that is close to you so that you'll actually logistically do it, not just say you're going to do it, but blow it off. And so Tai Chi is the sort of number one best prescription because, of course, that includes so many of these other things we're talking about. Number two, go vegan immediately. So when I say immediately, I don't mean, go throw out everything in your refrigerator, but begin the process of winnowing down to a plant-based diet by eliminating the things that you should not be eating, animal products, dairy, and most of all sugar, and begin to learn, get a vegan cookbook, experiment with things, find vegan restaurants, and find the joy of a plant-based diet. Those two are the biggest things.
So this is great information. And your recent book, Mad Monk Manifesto, how does that tie into what you're prescribing for people about getting out of pain?
So this book is a prescription for evolution, revolution, and global awakening. That's the subtitle. And so I've constructed the book in much the way that ripples spread out from a stone dropped in a pond. The book begins by talking about all the things we've been talking about today. It talks about your diet. It talks about moving. It talks about the way you see yourself in your life and in your community. And then it broadens out to the effects that the changes that you create in yourself will have on your family, on your community, on your country, and on the whole planet.
This is a very beautiful message. And I think you bring up a really important point, which is a lot of times when we're trying to be healthy, we're thinking about us, but we're part of the all. And the more that we have an awareness of how we live our lives affect everyone around us, even getting out of pain takes the stress off of all of our loved ones. We're in a better mood. They don't have to take care of us. It's a part of a bigger picture. So any final thoughts, Monk Yuen Ro?
Well, so what you just described is a win-win. And you also described something which is the central tenet of Taoism, which is that we are all one. The idea of separation, our separation from each other, our separation from other sentient beings on the planet, our separation from this magnificent, beautiful, pulsing blue marble system we call planet Earth, all of that is an illusion. And the sooner we accept that, the sooner our borders fall, and I mean that in a good way, the sooner we embrace each other and our lives and the world and the beauty of life and of being alive and of this intricate, evolutionarily developed, grand world we live in.
You've been listening to Monk Yun Ro. You can find out more about him and his latest book, Mad Monk Manifesto, at monkyunro.com. This is Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. And remember, when you take a bigger approach to getting out of pain naturally, when you take a holistic approach and look at what you're eating and how you're moving and how your lifestyle affects everyone around you, you can get out of pain naturally. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.